Hello and welcome to this special show on Rajya Sabha Television, wherein we bring you all aspects of India's fight against COVID-19, the pandemic, which we have been battling not only in India but all across the world. Different aspects of this fight, technological interventions, how the vaccines are being developed, drugs are being developed, and obviously now that we are starting the Lockdown 4.0. That's the fourth stage of the lockdown in India. The focus is again on reopening the economy or restarting the economic activities. And today we are going to take one of the important sectors here, that is automobiles. Now, the auto sector has faced a lot of crisis in the past 6 to 7 weeks without any sales in the month of April, a first time ever sort of situation there. So we'll talk about all the challenges there and how the action plan is for reviving the production, reviving the demand and the growth as well there. Let me first introduce the guest to you, beginning with Mr. Shashank Srivastava. He is the Executive Director, Marketing and Sales with Maruti Suzuki India. We also have with us Mr. Sidhartha. He is the National Economic Editor of Times of India. And we are also joined by a young professional from NITI Aayog who works on this particular sector, Mr. Abhishek Saxena. Welcome all of you gentlemen to Rajya Sabha TV. Let me begin with you, Mr. Srivastava, and let's try and understand, because from today onwards, as far as we know, Maruti Suzuki has restarted its production in its units. So what's the action plan with which you guys have come back to work?
Yeah, so actually we started production on the 12th of this month in Manesar, and we started with Gurgaon today. So actually we've been preparing for this for some time now, ever since the MHA gave guidelines allowing industrial activity to take place. And going forward, we are planning to ramp up the production and be ready for the increased demand, which will surely come down the line. And of course, as you know, we've also started opening showrooms, which were allowed actually from 4th of May. And so far, we have opened about 1,300 showrooms. So that's the way it's going to be. We are preparing. And remember, in our entire production chain, there is a supply chain of components also. So these are located in various corners of the country. So that is also a challenge, both to get all the units operational on the supply chain front as well. So we are doing that, and hopefully we will be ramping up the production very soon.
Okay, so supply chain is one of the challenges there. Apart from that, following all the protocols, following all the precautions on the production floor, obviously also would be one of those challenges. So what are the ways and means in which those precautions are being taken and that challenge is being tackled?
Yeah, so absolutely, because the process, the permission to start production has been with certain guidelines given as regards the safety norms to be followed. So these include social distancing, as you know, of at least a 6 feet distance, and also sanitization, frequent sanitization, thermal screening, and so on and so forth. So all those precautions have been taken. And we have even modified partly layouts, etc., to enable us to sort of adhere to all the norms which have been prescribed. And that's what we are trying to do to maximize our productivity given these constraints of social distancing.
Okay, let me begin, Sidhartha here. Sidhartha, the auto sector has been one of the worst hit sectors, due to the COVID pandemic crisis. So what is your outlook in terms of the difficulties which this sector faces right now and the ways in which those challenges can be tackled?
Auto sector isn't just, shouldn't just be seen in isolation. Auto sector is a very crucial sector of the economy, given its backward and forward linkages. I mean, there is steel, there is aluminium, there are other metals, there are hosts of ancillaries, components, and then this entire service network. So it's a huge sector, even in the index of industrial production, where the numbers would come, the zero sales and, the ripple effect across the sectors would be seen. Well, to answer the question on, how would Mr. Srivastava would be best placed to answer that. But yeah, supply chain will mean, getting trucks, getting workers, I mean the skilled workers who are probably the contract workers who are employed by Maruti and the other automobile companies may still be there, but the loaders, not just in their factories, but even in the even with the vendors, with the showrooms, etc. That will be a huge issue. Also, I don't know how inventories are going to be managed going forward, because just in time is a principle that auto sector has employed for years, and given the disruptions that we have seen over the last 2 months, especially a lot of it initially was the impact of the problems in China, in Wuhan, where production had stopped. So there was a supply chain disruption which began there. Then the domestic issues came in. So there's this whole issue of how you manage inventory, etc. And I think there would be a readjustment which a lot of these companies would be doing.
Okay, definitely. There'll be a lot of readjustments which will be required on various aspects, not only production, but the entire supply chain, inventory as well, and on the dealership front, as both of you are pointing out. Let me bring in Abhishek here. Abhishek, your perspective on the auto sector, specifically the kind of challenges which it faces right now and the policies which are already in place. Will that be sufficient to take the sector out of the, the difficult situation which it finds itself right now?
Sure. Thank you, Vishal. I think this is an unprecedented times for the country and for the whole world in itself. Specifically about the auto sector, if we look at the FY19 numbers also, it had seen a 20% decline in the sales in India. And especially, so if we look at segment-wise, commercial vehicles were the most badly hit part of it. So the sales went down by 42%, which comprises essentially of trucks and buses. More than that, I think the other two panelists have rightly articulated on the supply chain aspects of it, where there will be some bottlenecks that will be faced at the component suppliers and at the dealership and at the OEMs end. But there are a couple of issues that I specifically want to highlight, which pertain specifically to the export of auto and auto components from India. So 20% of our whole production. So, we have to keep in mind that India is the largest production hub of two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and tractors. 20% of our all production goes for exports. Now, if the markets in Southeast Asia or Latin America or in Eastern Europe face an economic downturn, so the industry would be badly hit right now. And our automobile sector is one of the most integrated sectors across the whole value chain in the world. So I think we have to keep those things in mind. Moreover, I think that the foremost thing that we need as policymaker needs to do is look at how to spur the demand again, and how to look at ways and means to push demand creation. I think in this aspect, governments, municipal bodies, state government, central government, all these can play a very important role. So, procurement. So, like, our state roadways transport units have very abysmally low number of public transport buses. So I think there needs to be a concerted push for getting the buses on board. You need to give some specific incentives for two-wheeler manufacturing, because it constitutes 70% of the whole manufacturing in India, and that is the competitive advantage that we have in the world also. So I think a redesigned policy framework needs to be formulated. Of course, there are some parameters like Make in India and manufacturing that has to be taken in mind. But we have to rebuild, we have to redesign. But at the same time, I think we are also cognizant of the fact that we have to rebuild and redesign sustainably also. We cannot go back to the old means per se fully. So that is the perspective that I want to bring into the debate.
Okay, so obviously we will have to rebuild, redesign, relook at the entire situation. But on the demand aspect, let me bring in Mr. Srivastava here. Commercial vehicles apart, obviously that is one plausible solution out there, that the demand can be driven by the government agencies or the state governments who can do that. But one part is that, and would you agree with that particular aspect, Mr. Srivastava? But also in terms of passenger vehicles and, be it cars or scooters or motorcycles, the score was 0 in the month of April. Taking it up from there would be a daunting task.
Absolutely. Actually, since the last week of March, when we have had the lockdown, there has been no retail. But as I just mentioned, after the showrooms were allowed to be opened starting from 4th, we have seen some traction even in the field. For example, we have delivered so far more than 5,000 cars. So, which is a good beginning, I say, considering that we just started, considering we're getting out of this rather unprecedented situation. And I think going forward, one of the points which clearly is important, and I think it was mentioned by one of the other panelists, that going forward, the economic activity, since the auto contributes to almost 8%, 8.5% of the total GDP of the country, going forward, and the correlation between the growth in automobile and the economy is very high. In fact, regression for analysis of the past 20 years would suggest R square factors of nearly 0.98 and so, which is pretty high correlation. So I think it all depends on how economy also grows. But at the moment, I think in the short term, we must also see how the sentiments pan out, especially coming out of this stressed situation with most customers are. In the long term, though, I feel people will prefer personal transport over public transport. And I think that is a slight positive for the personal transport sector. So it's going to be a clear tale of two times. One is a short term, and the other is a slightly longer term. So I see in the longer term, India, I think, is something which we need to worry about, not only from the demand side, but also from the supply side, as also from the consumer sentiment point of view. And the cash flows, which of all the entities which are involved in the auto trade.
Okay. Sidhartha, on the redesigning of the policies and sort of looking at this entire situation in holistic perspective, as you were saying, auto sector cannot be looked at in isolation here. So the kind of steps which have been taken so far by the government in terms of that relief package which was announced in terms of infusion of money in the economy to spur that demand, would that be enough, or would you suggest some specific auto sector specific policy twists or tweaks needs to be made here?
See, the key demand from the industry, including the auto industry, was to reduce the rate of taxation, the GST, which has not been done. And the view in the government is that lower taxes may not necessarily lead to creation of demand, because people have seen their incomes getting affected, or if not wiped out, and people are reluctant to buy, do purchases which they can defer at the moment. What you have seen is largely efforts to push loans, be it to the MSME sector, which can keep some of the vendors to companies such as Maruti afloat in terms of helping them pay salaries and other statutory costs, and also to give some money to NBFCs to keep them afloat and help them meet their liabilities. But unless the income levels improve, unless the sentiment improves, I don't think there would be demand for things like automobiles. Of course, someone who, if this lockdown and it means that public transport is not available for a large section of people, so for a commute, if my workplace is 20 kilometers away, I may either pool in a ride with someone, friend or a colleague, or I may opt for a two-wheeler if necessary, or a small car if my income permits. But given a choice, I wouldn't want to upgrade from a small car to a sedan immediately.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in short term, that spur to demand might not be that easy to come around. But the specifics which you are pointing out, let's bring in Mr. Srivastava again here on the way the auto industry looks at what can be done in terms of policy tweaks here.
Yeah, so actually, as far as we are concerned, we are very sure the government is apprised of all that's happening in the auto industry. And in fact, we look only at the auto industry, but the government surely knows about the other industries as well. So they will look at it in a more macro and in a totality form. They'll form a overall macro view and take actions accordingly. So we are quite sure of that. However, what we are focused on is what is in our control. And I think we will be we have been actually very focused on that. We have been trying to, through the various financing schemes or through our productivity being better or cost control measures, we are trying to spur demand as much as possible. One of the things which has been brought out very clearly in the consumer feedback in the short term actually is that people have been saying that they want to have more, they want to go through the booking process in a more digitalized way rather than, actually seeing showrooms, etc. And they are quite concerned with the physical sort of safety if they were to go around to the showroom. So what we have done is, and we have advertised and informed the consumers accordingly, is that we have a very tough SOPs, the standard operating processes now at the dealership, which takes it into care all the guidelines of the government. And without those SOPs being followed, we don't reopen the showroom. Second, we have had a very strong digital platform whereby consumers can actually pass through almost their entire journey of thinking about the car and purchasing the car through most of the digital means. And in fact, our research indicates that there are 28 touch points which consumers goes through before buying a car. So it's not a 0-1 sort of thing. So we have actually 21 of them of those touch points have already been digitalized. I think these are the things which we keep doing so as to give greater confidence to the consumers. Remember, the car buying is actually a discretionary purchase, as I think was mentioned by one of the panelists. And discretionary purchase requires the sentiment to be, and coming out of this slightly tough situation, the sentiments, anything which improves the sentiment of the consumers would definitely be welcome as far as demand is concerned. And that's what we are trying to do. And definitely we are also trying to take care of the affordability part through the tailor-made financing schemes for which we are in discussions with the banks. Okay. These are the things we are doing to spur the demand, and hopefully going forward, we will see much better times.
Okay, one more thing, Mr. Srivastava, now that you're talking about, the sentiments and spurring the demand and looking at the feedback as well, in terms of changes from here onwards, from the customer's point of view as well, from those who want to go ahead and buy new cars or new vehicles, the change in technology, moving to the new age technology, such as, do you see a demand for, e-vehicles or e-cars, spurring up in the movement from here onwards? Is there some sort of long-term change from here onwards, some possibility there?
Actually, e-vehicles, if you're referring to the electric vehicles, we have mentioned before that the current battery technologies make it actually very expensive for people to buy e-vehicles. Also, the current infrastructure of charging in the country is not really sufficient. Thirdly, there is this what we call the range anxiety, how much of the car can run on one charge, which has actually made the growth of electric vehicle across the world rather slow. In fact, even today across the world, about 1% or 1.5% is the range of the electric vehicles in terms of volumes. Mm-hmm. So I would rather say that in the short run, there are many other things which are likely going to happen, which is like people are most likely, we have seen in the past in stressed situations like this, consumers tend to gravitate towards more established brands. For example, a more reliable, more known brands is what they gravitate to. Secondly, maybe because the car buying would be largely for functionality. I think one of the panelists mentioned that people who have to travel 20 kilometers who may want to either share car with their colleagues or go and buy a small car. Yes, so functionality buying will increase, which means first-time buyers may probably increase. Third is that people, because of the lower income levels which are expected going forward for the short run at least, people might gravitate towards the smaller cars, and that is also a real possibility. Fourth, as I mentioned, public transport might be shunned or not really, people may not be inclined to use public transport, might also be a positive in the run for the use of personal transport vehicles. Okay. So let's see how it pans out. Surely it depends a lot on how things develop in the short run, leading up to the medium-term demand.
Definitely. There are different variables and several of them as well. Let me bring in Abhishek here. Abhishek, on two parts. On the policy tweak part, specifically for the auto sector, and two, when we're talking about this demand creation, looking at how, small cars might end up becoming the flavor of the day. But if you look at it that way also, and looking at the environment, e-vehicles is something which NITI Aayog also has been pushing for quite a long time now. So is this the right time to go with it? Maybe do some more policy tweaks, maybe make it more affordable?
Right. So I think I'll answer the second question firstly. So I think the panelists spoke about a movement from public and shared mobility towards the personal mobility, and specifically you'll see people moving from large cars to smaller cars. Let me give you a brief statistic around that. India has somewhere around 18 cars per thousand, whereas cities like Atlanta have somewhere around 900 cars. In the short run, in my personal opinion, do see a blip in the shared and public transport. But in the long run, Indian infrastructure just cannot afford to have a car-driven ecosystem in place. We cannot have a transport system which is backed by cars, which is backed by personal mobility. You have to build system which is built upon metros, public transport, shared mobility, buses. In that perspective, I think in the longer run, we need to push towards that. Mm-hmm. Now the second part of your question towards the electric mobility, I think the world over, we have seen the flavor of cleaner cities, breathable cities. Delhi has become much more cleaner. We have seen that it is doable. I think across the world, if I talk about United Nations bodies or the environmental bodies across the world and also in India, the people are much more optimistic as of now, and they want to move towards cleaner modes of transport. And when I say cleaner modes of transport, I mean reducing greenhouse emissions and pollution across the board, be it industries, agriculture, energy, power, everywhere. And in that, transport nearly plays a 1/3 part in that. So I think without addressing that transport part and moving towards a cleaner and shared mobility, I think the idea of Paris Pact or clean air is not possible in India. Whether you do it through electric mobility, whether you do it through hydrogen, whether you do it through some other forms of it. And agreed, as one of the panelists said, there are impediments to that. But, we have seen a lot of progress in that regard. And I think we must not homogenize or harmonize the problems which happen to the cars specifically. So the cars might have a range anxiety, but at the same time, we've seen a huge proliferation of electric three-wheelers across the country. In India, we have more than 20 lakhs three-wheelers running on road at this point of time. We can debate on the quality and other aspects of it at this point of time, but surely they have taken up pace. And in that aspect, I think a lot of policy decisions have come up, and we have taken 24 policy measures around that. There's a FAME incentive which is taking place around that. So a lot of policy framework has already been set up, and I think we'll be putting in more policy measures for uptake of shared and cleaner mobility forms.
Okay. Shared and cleaner mobility forums is something which is the key word out there, which Abhishek is focusing on. Obviously, for companies like Maruti Suzuki, the personal car segment will be the key segment to watch out for and see as to how the demand is looked. Let's have concluding comments from Sidhartha before we wrap this up. Sidhartha, from your perspective, if you sum up, the situation as well as the way forward for the entire auto sector in India.
I think what the coronavirus pandemic has done is that it has delayed the entry of electric vehicles in our lives, because given the kind of oil prices that you have, given the impact on income, so if I have to buy a car, I would not like to set aside more money on a vehicle which requires more capital investment. And typically you look at the capital investment more than the operating cost when you buy a vehicle. So, and given the oil prices where they are and where they may be for the next few months, people are going to prefer the old internal combustion engine. However, it's not my assessment is, and Mr. Srivastava would be better placed to answer that, is that the demand isn't going to be back to full capacity anytime soon. I think this financial year is going to be a very difficult year, not just for the auto industry, but for most industries where there is a discretionary spend which happens.
Okay, so it'll be a challenging time for the auto sector. Thank you so much, Sidharth there, Mr. Srivastava, and Abhishek as well. As everybody is pointing out, redesigning, recalibrating our approach in terms of the way we look at all these challenges, find solutions to them, spur the demand. Obviously, that is one aspect of which both the industry and the government would be trying to work upon. But the road from here onwards is not an easy one, just like for other sectors, for the auto sector as well. We'll keep an update on all that is happening on this as well as other aspects of Indian economy and how we are trying to come out of this tough situation where we find ourselves because of COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, you keep watching Rajya Sabha television and keep following all the social distancing norms as well as other guidelines, because ultimately it is you and me who can make a difference in this fight against COVID-19. Thank you.